Thanks for joining us tonight, Sean. I'm going to kick things off, though, in a little more formal way because we are going to record this, and you can review the game tape later to see where, in case you're letting us in on too many trade secrets or NDA, we can always look at that later on. But anyway, this is to say that it's being recorded for the benefit of everybody on the call tonight. One thing that we're going to do again, and it's particularly of importance tonight, is speak to our land acknowledgement. So specifically, we do recognize that we're on unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, of which we are mindful of and pursuing opportunities to address our reconciliation efforts. Interestingly for me tonight, Sean is a project partner who has worked with us in the past, and he's looking ahead to another project that's connected to our Métis community, and I'm looking forward to learning about that. Sean he's very aware of the program. As I'd mentioned to those of you before Sean joined us, he's working with a few alum right now. He's got something in the works, which is really cool. Not necessarily fully secret, but I'm going to let him speak to that. Sean, I don't know if you want to jump in and say hi to the class, but I'm going to kick it off by, first of all, saying thank you so much for joining us. Excited to see what we might be able to do. Want to learn about your personal journey, where your company's at, where you're going to, and all the ways that we can connect moving forward. So thank you. And you should be able to have screen sharing permissions. I believe I've enabled that for you if you're going to share any slides. But Sean, welcome to the cohort.
Cool, Dennis. Thank you so much for having me and for asking. It's super fun to be here. Hi to all of you. My name is Sean, as Dennis has very eloquently introduced me. Big fan of CDM. Have to say, had the MDM program been available when I was looking at school, would have been in there like no one's business. So a little bit of jealous or envious of all you guys. Although I know it must be tough doing everything remote now. It's a weird world we live in. So I hope everyone's doing well. As Dennis said, we've worked with CDM in the past. Did an industry project a couple of years ago, which was really, really great, and have a couple of CDM alumni on our team now. So yeah, excited for you guys as you start on this journey. I think the reason for me being here is kind of maybe there's a unique kind of perspective that I bring to the media and the tech sector. I'm co-founder of Hammer and Tong. We're a small content studio focusing primarily in XR these days, although we still do some traditional digital stuff. And it's been a wild ride. That's all I can say. It's been quite the journey. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of go through a little bit about myself and the company, and then kind of chart the last few years of our growth, focusing on a couple of particular projects, and then just I'm trying to share a few lessons that we, and I especially, have learned through those. And I hope they'll be tried to choose things that are a range of different categories. So hopefully there'll be something of interest and relevance for everyone. I'm not sure, Dennis, if you've got a plan for questions. I'm happy to take them.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you're up for it, we're a little casual in this, but if there's people that have questions along the way, they can post it in chat. So try to keep the flow going. I'll monitor it. Maybe I can jump in to give you a breather so you can have a sip of water or something nearby. But we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end.
That's all good. I'll certainly leave lots of time for questions, but I'm not averse to taking them throughout if there's stuff that isn't clear or people need a update on.
Awesome. And that's the thing. I'm going to set it up because you're another one of our guests who's working in digital media, who has, we'll say, a unique background. So when you were talking about, if this program had exists, when you were I had the same thought when building this program. If it existed, this would have been what I wanted to do. But I think you had a politics background, if I'm remembering correctly. But
if you want to go back that far, yeah. I studied at UBC primarily and did poli-sci and literature and double major in the arts.
That's a direct transfer into digital media XR if I didn't hear one.
Either there or Starbucks. So I chose the former. But no, I think, I wouldn't say I don't know. I've got lots of good things to say about the liberal arts. They're obviously not great for getting jobs, but they certainly cultivate a way of thinking.
I'm challenging that because so many of our guest speakers from the liberal arts, film and theater, again, like the founding director of our program, Dr. Jerry Sinclair, she came from a theater background. Stuart Butterfield, Slack, again, theater major, right? I mean, it's a I got a special place for liberal arts in my heart. So
100%. Doesn't necessarily make the most sense once you've just finished it, but I've certainly leaned heavily on the critical thinking that I've learned throughout. Also, it's great being able to bang out a paper of 500 words in about 20 minutes. So no qualms there. But as I say, I would have loved to do an MDM. It's a great program, and I think has a really nice balance of like the theoretical and the practical. So again, super happy to be here. Without, however, further ado, I'll jump in and just start telling you guys a little bit about myself. So I'm share my slides.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm seeing it. It's not in present now. Solid. Hey, we got there.
Right, so we'll start with me. As we just talked about, liberal arts background, got into journalism for a while in my late 20s. Couldn't really find the way to make that work. It's a tough, shrinking world for journalists. Then got into making film. And so my current business partner and I founded Hammer and Tong in 2014, I guess, after a couple of years of making short form content. We did sort of branded cinema and corporate material for a few years. And then in 2016, had our first experience with XR, primarily VR at the time, and made a sharp, hard pivot from which we haven't really looked back. Although, as I said, we still do some traditional broadcast media, and I've actually found that a really nice balance kind of being at the intersection of the different formats. So in addition,
I'm going to jump in here too, just because you got me excited about this, and because I like that traditional sort of and how you pivoted, and now you're all in kind of on this space. But I am going to, at one point, so I don't forget, I want to ask you about your thoughts on the metaverse and where the VR and also like transmedia can fit into it, and how that may, that previous background between, say, the traditional media with the VR might fit into the metaverse. So anyway, you can get there later on, but that's one of my questions that I'm just setting you up so it spins in the back of your brain. So
absolutely. I mean, those are both always spinning in my brain. The metaverse, I won't have as cogent an answer to speak of. It's something that I'm really excited to watch emerging, and I'm thrilled to be participating in. But obviously there's movers and shakers far beyond the scope that I understand, who are sort of designing that infrastructure. Mark Zuckerberg said some interesting things last week to that regard. But transmedia, I'm all over. And rather than seeing different formats of media as being in competition with one another, I really see them as part of a really interesting synthesis that we're seeing emerge, especially in terms of narrative content and in the need to have multiple points of contact for audiences across media and across devices. So I can talk at length about that if anyone is interested a little bit later, and you'll probably see through this brief presentation, like that's kind of where our work is heading itself.
Sure. One other thing I was just going to jump in on, and I don't know if this is intent or not, but your camera's off, so I can see your slides, but I'm hearing an ethereal voice. I don't know if you can hit the little camera in so we can kind of see your head next to your slides. But
and now I've mucked up my slides. Let's have a look.
We can roll with it. That's just, yes, your camera might be off or something. I have the
no, I think it's because it's an iPad, and I think it.
Oh, okay. So that's why I wasn't sure. I just wanted to give you the heads up. I usually like to see you, and I can read. I'm a poker player, so it's like I prefer a live game than an online one, because I got to get that read. But no worries. Sorry for the interruption. I just thought I'd like to let you know what I'm seeing.
Not at all, and it's good to know.
And also what I'm feeling. I'm feeling appreciative of your time, so I'll let you get back on track here.
No, absolutely. I will. I could also go at length about how frustrating I find iPads. Very good functionality. That being said, I won't turn into an Apple tirade. So co-founder Hammer and Tong, that's 2014, 2016, we pivoted into XR. We've found our groove now, and are getting for the most part, to make the media that we want. We do a very little bit of service work once in a while for projects particularly interesting, but for the most part, we develop the content in-house, which is how we like it. So in my capacity at Hammer and Tong, I kind of do 3 different things to varying degrees, depending on what we're doing. I certainly work a lot as a creative director, establishing and maintaining the vision for our projects, overseeing the development of art and design and technical. I don't get to do that as often as I would like, but it's something that I think is really where I feel most sort of in my element, especially when it gets into the space of experimenting with integrating technology and narrative. I'm also a producer, trained, I guess, experientially as a film producer, but now also in a technical capacity. That means I find finance for projects, I staff up with personnel, I oversee project management. I get to have little creative flourishes here and there, but mostly it means I sit around in parking lots and make phone calls, as you can see demonstrated there. And then lastly, because it's our company, I exist as an entrepreneur, which has some crossover with media and production, but is also involved with, sort of longer term revenue cycles and economic health and staff and administrative work, as well as like vision within the entity that is Hammer and Tong. So it's from those 3 perspectives that I'll be offering my insights. And I certainly don't mean anything I say to be taken as absolute. These are just things I've picked up along the way. But yeah, please feel free to chime in if anything doesn't make sense within that regard. And hopefully, if you're at CDM, one or many of those are appealing to you. So as I said, in 2016, we pivoted into XR, and by 2018, we kind of found our first traction. And that's when we made Wetigo, the one who eats human flesh, which was a branching live action narrative in VR, pardon me, delivered actually on the now defunct Samsung VR store. And a really dark, foreboding, ominous story built out of a Woodland Cree legend. We had the opportunity to work with some really cool collaborators from Alberta on it, and put the user in the position of a person abandoned in the forest that was being haunted by a Wetigo, which is a creature of folklore that emerges when societies have fallen prey to greed. So it was really interesting, deep moral narrative, and filled with lots of horror, also though done in live action, so sort of making use of our experience working with film. So the lessons that I learned with Wetigo, which still stay with me to this day, in terms of design lesson, interactivity equals complexity. And you can see there on the right, this is a part of our branching narrative. It's pretty simple, right? We only had, I think, 12 unique endings, but so quickly does complexity increase once you allow interactivity. And for me, this is a major milestone coming from film, which is strictly linear. You have direction, which means you tell the audience what they're looking at all the time. Working in both the 3D and an interactive space meant we had to relinquish a lot of that control and trust that the user was much more contingent in determining the outcome. And not only that, it sort of increases the complexity in terms of narrative, trying to make sure that logic is maintained throughout, that choices have the right setups and payoffs, and that things all get to the ending that they're supposed to. This has firmly influenced me at the front of any project now, where I almost have like an interactivity bar in my brain, that when a thing gets to be too interactive or seems like it could be, more than we can handle, I'm always trying to dial it down, because I think good interactivity, albeit limited, is always going to be better than more when it's not so good. In terms of a collaboration lesson, I learned a lot on this project about how differently people and members of a team respond to adversity. We had a lot of trouble on this shoot, including a bear that occupied one of our sets. during which, one person ran to get a gun, another person ran to see the bear. You never know until you're in really like tough straits how people will respond, and how we respond in tough moments says a lot about us.
You just made the most Canadian statement, I think, of any of our guests so far. It's like, it's just a bear on set. Somebody will run to it, somebody will run away from it. That's Canada. There you go.
Absolutely, with a canoe in the background.
Yeah, exactly. It couldn't get more Canadian. There you go. Thanks for that, Sean.
I mean, I should say we do definitely focus on Canadian content. That is currently our niche, although we're hoping to expand beyond bears and canoes in the not too distant future.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if this is in your deck, so I may be getting ahead of myself, but I was going to start asking, like, how is it to work with culturally connected content, like looking at Indigenous, whether it's the folklore stories, connections within Indigenous communities. But I guess we'll get there in the future.
Yeah. But I can certainly speak to that because we started one of a number of Indigenous partnerships in early 2018, actually, before we made this project. And it's been a really interesting experience. I felt very fortunate to have been able to work with so many different communities and collaborators in creating work, because we come from a space that, certainly 5 years ago was pretty niche in terms of having the capacity to do interactive VR. So that put us in a great position to partner with people. I think I find it to be one of the most meaningful parts of the work we do, in that I never feel like we're just making content. We're also contributing sort of to the broader social processes that are going on in Canada. Ones that, as you nicely said off the top, Dennis, like time to fix some things. So I feel that's one of the things that really helps me get out of the house in the morning when I'm not thrilled otherwise, is knowing that the work is meaningful. And we've worked with a few other non-Indigenous communities that have had marginalized experiences in Canada, and that's felt like amazing work as well. That being said, as a settler, as someone who emigrated here as a child, definitely been an education in culture and protocol and how to do things properly, and being respectful and making sure that you're not leading with creative ideas and expropriating or appropriating or being insensitive to context. And that's something I'm still learning. And, we have required reading now for any of our team. We're working on Indigenous content resources that try to bring them up to speed about the situation, because it is so sensitive. And, those of us who aren't affected by these things can sometimes run ahead with excitement, not realizing that we're actually making a mess. And if I have a personal mantra, it's certainly not to ever make a mess and leave it behind. So definitely a few other Indigenous projects on this, and I'm happy to field any questions insofar as like being a settler working on Indigenous material. Obviously, I can't speak to a broader Indigenous perspective. Business lesson, FYI, if you're ever an entrepreneur, freelancer, or contractor, like project-specific bank accounts, so important. Like, there's nothing worse than coming to the end of a $80,000 project and having everything coming out of an account that also has a bunch of other stuff. So if you just write that down, like don't do it. It's worth $10 a month to make sure that you don't have to do all that accounting at the end, or just get an accountant. But you're going to save yourself a lot more money with them if you have this specific account.
I'm going to say $10 a month is a lot cheaper than an accountant, Sean. So
absolutely. And you end up paying, you get your accountant to sort that mess out for you, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. So, more broadly, this sort of just speaks to like good documentation. Right? If you're the person who's responsible for a project, like make sure that someone who's not you can understand it at the end, because it's really easy in the moment to think, I'll remember this, but you won't, because you have 42 other transactions between now and then, and you can't remember what you spent $700 on. It's just, I've wasted far more time than I would have liked trying to work out the answer to those mysteries.
Yeah. No, and actually, Larissa's got a good point in chat here too, and it's cheaper unless you have multiple projects, so which I'm totally agreeing with. So scale, right? So at how many projects would you juggle at any given time?
I mean, fewer and fewer, trying to make it simpler and simpler, but now I'll have projects that themselves have multiple bank accounts.
Mm.
These days, I guess, I mean, at the tail end here, I've got 4 things that we're working on going forward. So you could say 4. Try to basically, in my own sort of scheduling, I try to basically have an A project, a B project, and then 1 or 2 C projects. And those get a commiserate amount of my time per week. Definitely been guilty for many years of doing far too many things.
I actually, again, on your business lessons here too, I think that's a good one, because so many people that are, say, project specific or on a specific contract, if they haven't lined up that next gig, you're going to lose some good people, right? So as a business owner and managing multiple productions, if you can keep a little bit of continuity or keep some of the core staff together, because Vancouver is not immune to the staff up, layoff, staff up. I mean, anyone that's looking at the film and animation industry, that's just something to be aware of. So how have you mitigated that, the keeping a team together, contract work, project balance of projects? Or
I mean, yeah, that's probably the most difficult thing, I think, as a small business owner. I get talent poached constantly because of that, because we're coming to a softer spot and I have to get someone down to part-time, and then Sony comes along and offers them full-time.
Yeah.
There's definitely like a continual drain that we've experienced. I've lost 2 or 3 people this year to that. But in terms of the question that you're asking, I mean, that's the key to, I think, both being a producer and an entrepreneur, right? Is that you're only ever partially in the now. Part of you is always ahead, right? You've always got to be forecasting.
Well, I'm loving that you're bringing this up too, and I like that earlier image of you sitting in an alley drinking while on your phone, with a more glamorous photo of you as an entrepreneur next, because it's, for me, that's what an entrepreneur is. Actually, it's the less than glamorous side of the phone calls and Excel sheets and bank accounts. And I think everyone, they hear transmedia producer, and it's all about the creative direction and the vision but keeping the lights on, having multiple bank accounts. These are pro tips. And as a small business, it's important to be aware of that, but also to make people aware of those challenges, right? So as much as you might have that passion project and wanting to go all in on the creative, you got to keep the business and keep everything moving. So thanks for the reality check.
100%. And I think, to that point, something that I find a regular part of both producing and entrepreneuring is in opposition to that glamour, I mean, is the reality that when it's your thing, if someone else isn't around to do it, you're going to end up doing it. And that means, going to fill up the car that someone left without gas, or cleaning up the office after the party, or stepping in to hold a lamp because someone just walked off a set, right? Like, if it's your thing, it's your responsibility. You don't always have time to find someone. You don't always have the money to find someone. And that means you end up doing a lot of things yourself as well as you can. So that's a tough lesson to learn. If anyone goes in that direction, you'll learn it. And it really suits some people. Like, I joked with Dennis before coming to do this that I would be happy to convince anyone who wanted to be an entrepreneur not to do so. I don't mean that, but it is a thing that's for a certain type of person who is okay with. Yeah, it's not glamorous off the start.
Yeah. And I think it's fair. It's fair to bring up Jason Elliott for everyone on this call too. So Jason, who is both an alumni of the program and the game design instructor and a transmedia enthusiast, he did the entrepreneur route within the MDM program. Did a pitch project, a venture project. He realized he's just not a business guy. Like, he loves the content creation, but the sourcing, funding, financing, all the things that would go into like the less than glamorous side kind of led him to figure out where he wanted to just focus. So, and I know you've got a connection to Jason too, at least around transmedia interest and otherwise. So wanted to bring that up. It's you both, there's some similarities, but also, it's understood. You're heard.
Well, and I think it's key to like anything that's beyond, bigger than one person. Like, teams, thrive when everyone's doing the role that they are best at. And generally the things we're best at are the things we kind of enjoy doing. So I think that's a really important process. I was actually chatting to a CDM grad a couple of weeks ago who was looking for some mentorship. And he's, I think, 26 or 27. And I told him, like, the fact that you don't know what you want to do right now is totally cool, because you're working that out. And that's something that takes us time to do. And I'm still working that out within my context. So, knowing that there's a best role for you, whatever that might be, is like finding that's the goal, not being a certain thing just because you think that's what you want to do. Like, I thought I wanted to be a writer. I don't. I've done a lot of writing. I know I don't want to be a writer. And that's, I think, often the way we learn. When we explore something that we don't know about, then we find out what it actually is. No matter what, though, separate bank accounts. So then Sisters of Sorrow 2019 was a digital pilot that we put together with a really rad creative team that we brought together. This was our first step into kind of like an Indigenous adjacent type space, where like this was not dealing with indigeneity specifically, but primarily Indigenous cast, mostly Indigenous creative team. And it was kind of like based on some magic realism that was drawn from Indigenous folklore. Best log line I've ever had. It was about a all-female Indigenous supernatural biker gang. It was awesome. Those women were great. The motorbikes were great. Unfortunately, the project hit a loggerheads when some of the creative partners couldn't agree on a way forward. So despite having some really big interest, I mean, this got us in the room with Netflix, which was super cool then, but nothing was able to come of it, which means I learned some great lessons from it. Design-wise, like,
I'm going to jump in there too on this because that's super cool and amazing. And again, the idea of the log line, I mean, this has actually been long connected to the program too, condensing that idea down to its simple core. And you had me at biker gang, and that's just like, I'm in. But I did want to get to one of the questions in the chat, so in case we get too far down the line about the challenges of balancing everything. Is that an issue around running the small studio or being a director behind an idea that's in production? That idea of taking on the many roles, the many hats. Like, is that one of the other?
Like wearing too many hats?
I would believe so. It's or not maybe not even for, some can manage that and they thrive in that, but I mean others, is it just an expectation, like when you are that small business director, or like if you're the director, and I'll say that in the traditional, say, film sense, or that behind the creative vision, that's expected of you?
Well, I mean, I think it's like, in my position, there's no expected of me. Like, I'm the last line, right? So it's not that anyone expects anything of me. It's just like, if I don't tell them to do it, or if I don't have someone to do it and I want it done, then sometimes it's just going to have to be me to do it. And I'll get further down the line in some of my collaboration lessons to like some of the challenges with management and human resources. But like, for instance, I have a marketing campaign that's launching for a show this week, and one of our sponsors just tapped me and was like, "Hey, loving what we're seeing. Can we get a 400-word write-up about the show? We'd love to send it out in our mailer." And I'm like, great. But unfortunately, my content manager just had a death in the family, and she's out, right? So like, the person I would hand this to isn't there. Everybody else is either doing other stuff or not particularly, the right skill set to do creative writing. So I sat down last night and in 45 minutes, banged the thing out, and it's been delivered, right?
I see your liberal arts to the rescue right here. There you go. Well done.
100%. Whereas if I had an accounting background, I probably would have had a few saviors and different things early on. But like, I could have said, forget it, we can't do it. But I wanted that thing to happen. And, I don't know if this ever changes. Like, you don't just have surplus labor lying around, right? Like, certainly on short notice. And so that's often what happens, is that you do need to do something because it's got to happen quickly and there's no one to do it. To maybe the part of the question that I didn't answer though, like, I think some people are definitely better able to multitask than others. I don't think any of us do lots of multitasking well. Like, whatever there's, those 3 hats that I wear, like, it's a little much at times. So I definitely think like there's a risk of spreading yourself too thin if you're trying to do too many things, but that's ultimately determined by scope, right? We could all do, if anyone has not seen it, there's a wonderful little movie called Primer. It's maybe like 15 years old. It's a time travel film, one of the best. This one guy did most of himself. Like he wrote it, directed it, shot it, produced it, edited it, stars in it, just does everything. It's a super small little film, and he was able to do that. For the most part, though, it's like one role, 2 roles per project. Like you can't do more than that because these are full-time efforts that require lots of you. And sometimes what I find is just like the pivot in my brain from creative direction and producing. Like those are very almost antagonistic roles. And so nowadays, if I'm going into a project, I try to make sure I've got one person running each of those departments, and then I just sort of closely liaise with them, because I don't think it's an easy thing to jump between things that are so opposite to each other. So then moving into Sisters, design lesson that I learned was just the significance of atmosphere and framing experience. Like this, I think especially applies in VR, maybe a little bit in AR, and certainly in film. Like, that which you see, that which you see, that like those little things that give you the impression of what a thing is. Like something I'm really into recently is like impressionistic landscapes, with the understanding that like, you don't need to see every leaf on a tree. Like as long as you see kind of things that look like trees, you can know you're in a forest. And that's something I find just increasingly that I go back to in terms of answering the question, like, what are we trying to communicate? And especially with like the continual tension between like how high fidelity do we want something to be? And I think something that feels right, even though it doesn't necessarily look the best, often goes a lot further than something that looks really good, but maybe there's less of it. And in terms of the picture that we shot, there's nothing in terms of filming like shooting in real locations. Like you want a dingy biker bar, the only way to do that is to go to a dingy biker bar, because you cannot recreate that. Although I will say we got $12,000 of lights stolen from this bar, so maybe trade off there as far as whether that was a good idea. Collaboration, carefully choose whom you work with. Really, really important. Like I said earlier, you learn about people through adversity. That can be a great bonding experience. It can also be terrible, but the people we work, like in the end, a project is people. That's what it is. And it's the processes and interactions through which people like work together. And I think whether it's making sure that you are feeling that you're in a respectful, like supportive, nurturing space, whether it's making sure that your coworkers, your colleagues, your bosses, your employees, making sure that they're reliable and honest. I think it's really important, and it can take some missteps to do so. I've had several years before these of trying to find good team and not being able to do so, and having some real disastrous experiences. And this year I had a terrible experience hiring the wrong person for a role. But consider who you're working with before you jump into something. And if it's early on in something and you're getting feelings that maybe it's not right because of the people, step back, because that's the easiest time to do it. Obviously we don't always have choice in that matter, but I would just say that, like, as interesting as a project might sound, what's more important is the people that you're working with. Business lesson, this connects to the first, is to know your cash flow, right? It's all one thing to sit down and write a budget at the start of a project thinking that this is what it's all going to cost. Something else to see where the money is actually going, and to be able to forecast through the end of the project how much money you need to have. I don't think there's a worse or a more uncomfortable experience I've had business-wise than getting to the end of a project and realizing that I'm a chunk of money in debt, and it's money I don't have. So, forecasting and lining things up in a predictive way is just invaluable. And something that I think probably applies to design as well. Like, you should be able to go through the steps of the process to get to the end. And in a financial sense, that means making sure that like they're all accounted for in terms of money. This is one of these things that I learned just through making mistakes. I'm sure there are some people, maybe some of you guys, who just have got some training or better common sense than I do. But yeah, I would try to avoid learning this mistake on the fly, because it can be a real bummer. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water.
You've earned it. No, I'm excited to hear about this project because I'm somewhat familiar with it. So
you are indeed, and this artwork's actually done by a CDM grad as well. Had a bunch of CDM kids on this project. Chinatown XR was, I mean, it's kind of COVID hit, and we fortunately had lined up some financing, and so we just tucked our heads and got to work. Made it through 2020, delivered it last year, and are currently trying to find a permanent home for it in Vancouver. It's an AR, VR cross-platform narrative. So this is where we can start to touch on some transmedia, because I've certainly creatively been like adamant about AR and VR not being opposed, as they're often framed in sort of pulp media. And so this was a great multi-year collaboration with UBC's Asian Canadian and Asian Migration Studies program. Involved lots of community outreach, oral history, some deep family work for a couple of our creatives, and follows the story of Monty Lee, who real person who died in 2009, and his life in Chinatown, sort of several different chapters of it, from when he decided against his dad's wishes to go to enlist in the Second World War, with the hope that that would challenge the Canadian government's prohibition on Chinese citizenship. Then in his return to Chinatown in the 60s, when it was really like a hot sort of entertainment neighborhood in the city, and then concluding with, gosh, what was the last one? Oh, and then concluding with him sort of, you know, catching his granddaughter up on the experience of, you know, returning to Chinatown as an older man. So those kind of three scenes portrayed in there. And so what this was a, you know, VR delivery for the Quest, and then and it's like a real, like a spatial installation using iPad AR, for which we prototyped a number of really interesting tools, including some holographic display. We did a diorama with living scenes inside of it, and several other sort of AR components, a couple of which ended up on the scrap floor. Big lesson here is horizontal before vertical. And this was a tough one to kind of define, because there's a lot that I learned about this. But like UX, I'm not a designer, but I'm constantly learning about design. But like knowing what your UX is and how that feels and what the purpose of it all is, and making sure you can go through it with as little detail or, you know, effect as possible, and that it is enjoyable, is so key. Because we jumped the gun and got very quickly into building, making the high end, like the final assets, you know, polishing the colors, getting the lighting right. And it was just not, like the interactivity wasn't even established. Like this notion was you walked through the gates of Chinatown and then suddenly went into the past, which is a really cool concept. But the rationale for being there and what one was supposed to do there and why you were able to move around the space, you know, the core of that wasn't established enough for us to jump so much with building assets out. And consequently, resources went towards, you know, building it, and not where they could have been better deployed towards making sure the thing was really good. So we've had to do a lot of under the hood work trying to resolve that, and we've kind of got to that stage now. But I was giving this lesson before I started on the project, and I promptly ignored it, and I wish I had not. But sometimes that's what you need to do in order to learn lessons. And so just to contextualize, this is a story map, just kind of plotting out the interactive nodes as the user moved through Pender Street. So we recreated Pender Street kind of meter by meter, basically, so that it exists in both its 1940s and 1960s form, as well as present day. Collaboration lesson, bigger team, bigger headache. From a managerial perspective, like and to this, I would also say like bigger is not necessarily better. I used to think that I wanted a studio that had like, 20 or 30 people. Now we've got, a core team of 7, and that's great. And we've got a couple of solid contractors and partners who come on, making it like 10 or 12. Like that's as big a team as I want. And adding people, it just makes things more complex. It means more people to manage. It means more communication problems. It's definitely, it's easy for us to quickly think about what the big successful example is, but there's a lot of work that goes into establishing those things, and you don't have solid management and communication chains established already, then scaling up can be a lot more trouble than it's worth.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to give you a breather too, because I kind of want to jump on that view of success, and I think it's kind of getting dated, like with this idea that a studio needs to be a 300, 500,000 plus studio to be a success. Like, success is sort of the, where you're finding the reward. And I mean, you personally touched on it, that you're happy with the studio, like with a core 7 contractors to 12. And if you like the work and you're doing meaningful work, that's success, right? So I want to start focusing on that more too, with the idea that, success is in the eye of the beholder, I guess, right? So it's, and this is, you're living the dream, man. You're doing what Jason wanted to do, and you've lived to tell the tale. So you're a success, buddy.
I mean, I'll take that and stick it in my pocket for next Monday, and
use it.
Shit goes to the fan. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, and I mean, hopefully in our, ever what's the word? Drenched social media environment, where we're like constantly seeing representations and performances of other people's lives and what things are supposed to be like. I think that's super wise what Dennis just said. Like, success is yours, right? If you feel happy with it, then that's the thing. And I've certainly found, like, I do not want a larger company. I don't think ever. Maybe more people working around it, but like I have my team and I love that. I don't want more than that. And definitely like thinking that, whether it's like a bigger budget or a, more famous actor or more people working on it, like if you don't enjoy that at that size, then it's no good. And if you don't enjoy it at a smaller size, well, then maybe you need to do something bigger or change how you're doing it on a smaller level. But to Dennis's point, like absolutely, success is it is the individual who experiences it. Business lesson from Chinatown, which is, if you need to pivot hard. Obviously, we pivoted hard once when we encountered XR, but Chinatown was initially intended to make use of some of our in-house live action 3D capture techniques. I had this idea of like the need for like authentic movement and real looking people in order to establish the historical setting. And then right as we were finishing our design brief, COVID hit. And certainly for the first 3 months, like filming became impossible. So we sat down and in about 48 hours decided, okay, well, let's learn how to animate. I had never animated anything before. And we dove into it and it worked. I mean, definitely learning experience. Not everything worked super well, but I think pivoting, making the choice and going at it right away, that was necessary at that time, because waiting to see would have been wasting time and money and wouldn't have led to an answer. And I think that's an important thing that I'm continually learning in business is, being decisive, not knee-jerk, but making, like, when a decision confronts you, make it solid and stick to it, because there's a lot of lost cadence or tempo from making a partially making a decision. And this point is sort of further being explored, or we're further exploring it now, is like we're doing a lot of animation because it seems like that's where the market is headed, and it's fine. We're finding new and interesting ways to animate, which is super cool. But I still like doing live action. We still do some of it, but more and more it seems like our workflow in the near future heading towards more digitally generated content. So if you got to make the move, do it. Don't do anything with a half step, because that will just leave you kind of in the middle of the street, and you can't stand in the middle of the street for very long. Okay, so this year we've just finished shooting. Well, we're picture locking actually tonight, hopefully. Shadow of the Rougarou, which we shot this summer, and going into sound mix or sound design next week with an eye to delivering at the end of the year, sort of middle December. It's a digital streaming series with the same, a lot of the same crew that we did Sisters of Sorrow with, although now they all agree on things. And it's definitely like, I can really see looking, when I put these notes, these slides together, I can really see like the threads in our work. So this is a 19th century Métis-based Western horror. It's about a young woman who's returning home after being away for a long while and encountering, the things that she ran away from. There may also be a werewolf in it, and yeah, it's a really rad little show. It's looking great. We're super thrilled with it, and it's going to be launching on APTN in, I think, April. Nice. And we're already getting some good interest from finance to make more. So
looks like you got your lights back too. The lighting's beautiful here. It's those $12,000 lights were resurfaced somehow, I guess. But
well, we paid for those ones, and we got some more expensive ones, because we did, I think this was an 11-day shoot, and we did 6 nights, I think. So we were out in the woods for a good long while, which is amazing. It's like going camping, except with the chaos of making a movie.
Nice. No, it looks cool. And actually, I looked at it. Kind of had the series Once, I guess the whole Snow White. It's also shot in BC. Kind of has that fairy tale vibe to it. But I'm excited about this. I'd heard about it. I've got some, we'll say, general knowledge, a peek behind the curtain that you're working on this, but I'll let you get back to your plans here from your notes. But so this is
happy to. This is what for a producer, this is what we call a success. When you shoot a thing and you're in post-production, you're like, oh, it's great. That's really nice. It doesn't always happen like that. So I'm certainly savoring it right now. This project began during COVID. Like we started pitching, I think, in like February or something in 2020. Took almost a year to put the financing together, but we managed to do it. Had some really good partners, including the Indigenous Screen Office, which gave us a great opportunity to work with knowledge keepers and elders to develop language for screen. So we ended up shooting in 4 languages: English, Métis language called Michif, Cree, and then Chinook jargon, which is a neat little trade speak from around BC. And that's super cool. Like being able to, that's sort of the point I made earlier, where like it's more than just a show when we're bringing languages to screen that very few people speak anymore because of colonization. Like that's
really cool. And again, I'm actually going to jump in. So what's the runtime? Larissa had a question on that. I was just
so it's a micro series. So we got, total runtime for 6 episodes is 38 minutes. So it's 6 by 6. So that's what it's going to screen on APTN as. And then we see it. It's also like a full length pilot. So that's what we'll be sort of moving forward with in terms of pitching it further. And I guess it was really fun to work with episodes, and it was really fun to work with short episodes, because there's something about like the design challenge of fitting into like a box that you can't have be any bigger is really nice. And I think it's certainly in terms of story, like I watch movies rarely anymore, but when I do, like so many of them are too long. They don't need to be that long.
Yeah.
I always think there's a beautiful art in telling the story in as simple a way as possible. And I think
this is very topical, because we just had a talk before your talk, and it was about time boxing, in a sense, because our faculty had to deliver their electives in 3 minutes each, just to clear a runway for you, my friend. You had a whole hour; they had 3 minutes, so I had some pull there for you.
But I think, I mean, and that's great to, pull a lesson out of this that wasn't even there. Like time boxing is key, whether for, making a thing, which, speaks to scope, whether for managing your own time. Like, I think it's a really important thing to learn to do the 1 hour job, right? Not to do the best job you can on something and however long that takes, like do the 1 hour job. Got 2 concept artists on right now, and I'm always saying, just do like the dirty 2 hour job. I don't want you to spend any more time with that, because perfectionism in an early stage of developing something it's not good, right? Like you get too caught up in details that maybe aren't even the right details, similar to what we did with the expanse of Chinatown. So I think time boxing is your friend. And just as a personal suggestion, I guess that's all I'm doing here, but as another personal suggestion, like if you don't already, tracking your time at your work time, I think is super important. It'll be invaluable should you ever freelance or be an entrepreneur, but it's also it's good to have data about how long things take you, so you can find inefficiencies and improve. I've got 3.5 years of every day it's just logged, and it's really good because when I do check-ins, I can see sort of where I'm still lagging or where I've made improvements. I think that's really valuable. Design lesson on this show, and these numbers might be a little skewed, but they're what I'm using right now. 80% prototyping and 20% production. Like, gotta do the development, right? Whether it's like I was saying with Chinatown and like, what's the interactive loop, what's the mechanic, or if it's with a script or something linear, like, is the story really there? Like, iterating at that, like, it's the cheapest, easiest time to make changes that will affect the entire project. Once you get to making, a bunch of decisions are made, whether you're aware of them or not. A bunch of things are costing a lot more money to do and to fix, and it's very difficult to go back. And you've also built in a certain assumptions. And so I think you just can't spend enough time, and obviously you can't, you got to stop at some point, but like it's really good to stop and really work through a project. And a lot of you guys probably already know this if you've got any design or UX backgrounds, but testing is like my new favorite thing when it comes to something that's interactive. And what's known as development in terms of scripts is it's just the best. Like, we're not looking to make any new Rougarou right now. We're looking to get money to develop it further, because having a good story, there's only one time to do that, right? And you can't substitute nice camera work or good special effects for bad story, just like you can't substitute cool old-fashioned buildings for the lack of an interactive loop. And this image is just illustrating some of the design we did on the Rougarou, which is it's a Métis werewolf. And we started with pen and paper and slowly drew it out, went through a number of iterations before actually going into special effects, makeup design, and building out the creature itself.
Was that prosthetics, like live action aesthetic? Or did you was it CG?
No. Probably we're going to enhance it a little bit with some VFX, but no, almost entirely practical. And it actually looks pretty good. I have to say, I'm pleasantly surprised. I was not happy when I saw how much it was going to cost, but it looks pretty good. So, we'll be doing some companion digital developments on similar creatures this year as well, but for the time being, live action. Collaboration, resolve conflict. Like, I don't think this might be the most important lesson I've learned in collaboration. Like, conflict's okay, it happens all the time. You say something that pisses me off, I respond in a way that's offensive to you. Like, this, we're people, and we all have edges, and we all have good days and bad days, and some of us just annoy each other, and that's okay, right? Avoiding conflict is not the name of the game. Addressing it and respectfully and authentically resolving it is super, super key. And I think it's so important within teams to cultivate an atmosphere where it's okay to discuss conflict. Like, we just had a huge blowout in our edit suite a few weeks ago. But then we sat down and talked about it, and everyone got a chance to say how they felt, and things were hashed out. And what was a really uncomfortable experience became a really good one, because we moved on from disagreement to a place of more mutual and shared understanding. And so I think like this really goes two ways. I think like there's the need to like listen to someone when they want to raise an issue with you, with your behavior. But then it also comes to your own sort of responsibility to raise issues when they're a thing. Because sitting on stuff and trying to get over it yourself, like there are things that works for, but some things you have to express. Otherwise they turn into resentment and build up and explode in more negative ways. And so I know you guys will all be working in teams coming up. I would say at the start of those teams, as best you can, like just talk about and agree on ways for resolving conflict, whatever those might be. But having agreed upon rules for how we deal with these things and then following those just leads to better team harmony, and it just leads to everyone being more okay with whatever's going on. Because you can tell me my idea sucks and I can be hurt by it, but if we can talk about it and I can feel, okay, you don't mean I'm an idiot, you just don't think the idea is good, then it's all good, as opposed to me walking away thinking that you think I'm stupid. No good comes of that.
Actually, I really appreciate that, bringing that in, because not everyone does address that, and it is such a common thing to be aware of. And again, like for everyone on this call, like you are going to work in teams, you are going to form tight connections, and then sometimes the conflict's going to come up. Finding a system for being able to communicate, resolve, you do need a breathing time, but these are, it's also the long tail of your network here. You want to keep these connections. They're going to be part of your network for life, right? So you need to find ways to both plan for, deal with and move past certain challenges, but be aware of it. And again, this is a real life perspective here from a partner. So I just want to say, Sean, thanks for sharing that, because it does come up. As much as we're all sort of playing in the same sandbox here, there's stresses within the CDM walls. No one's immune to that. So whether they're physical or virtual. So thank you.
And especially when you work in creative and you have deadlines, and those are tough times, right? People start to like miss out on sleep or get stressed, and the thing is, that's okay, right? And it's something I've had to learn, that it's okay to say, hey, I feel pissed off, and I can say it just like that, and I can get out, and I'm suddenly less pissed off, and someone else can validate my feelings, and I suddenly feel better about it, and we're back on track.
Hey, point of reference. So we're at 6:54.
I know I've been talking for 55 minutes.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some questions in the chat too. You probably don't see it because you're on an iPad, but I wanted to get a few of those in. And then Jason teaches at 7, so I can't keep you much longer than that, or I'll get the wrath of Jason. So
I'm going to zoom through 5 more slides super quick, and then I'm out. So delegate. Pass thing. If you're not good at it, find someone else who can. And in more like equitable teams, like share responsibility. Don't have people getting caught up with all the stuff, and don't take everything on yourself. So what we're doing coming up, this year we're starting development on Valley of the Rougarou. It's going to be an AR survival game. It's a companion to the show. Super jazzed on this. It's going to be tons of fun. I'm also doing some work on Gold Cold Mountain, which is a continuation of our Chinatown work, looking at a couple of figures who took some really nice photographs in early 20th century BC. Two Rivers, just got some development money in to start developing a pilot for super cool animated show. It's going to be historically based, involves Canada and Egypt. And then doing a lot of research now on automation pipelines, because that's obviously what I need to learn more about. So we're doing some really cool stuff, working on in-house performance capture, as well as a couple of interesting AI style transfer tools, and having a lot of fun with that, because I do really enjoy research. I'm done. I'm
Perfect.
sorry. I'm
going to start running through those questions, because you just answered one of them. So Larissa had an earlier question about if you had any experience with motion or performance capture, and you kind of touched on that. So hey, thanks. And actually, you were back on camera for a second. Now you're gone. Now you're back. Awesome. Look at that.
Oh.
Very cool. So you were saying, and again, I like this idea of the lifelong learning aspect of it too. Like you were saying, are you using assets when you're doing your animation and rigs? Are these like Unity store assets? Like where are you getting the models? Like
so no, we've got a nice library of models that we have in house. So we've got some pretty high fidelity ones we're working with right now. We're trying to like basically stress testing, like where's that happy balance between like quality of model and the performance capture data that we can, or the confidence rate in performance capture data that we can manage.
Yeah, no, which is awesome. And again, those are good solutions, especially looking at, the overall production cost and, starting to build up that library they can use for the future that benefits you down the road. Jumping in with another question from Ying. So if they want to be an entrepreneur and start making movies, XR, VR, AR as a startup, should they save a lot of money for themselves beforehand, or how can money come? How could the money come? Any tips for getting funding? Is it common for an artwork to be profitable, I guess, itself? Or like, so have you leveraged CMF or other funding sources in BC that artists can tap into?
Yeah, definitely. Good to have some money saved up, because like, you'll need it, depending on whether you just jump into your thing or do a proper business plan, which I never did. You might have different time periods where you're kind of working things out, but I think sitting down and planning out what you actually are planning on doing first, and like soliciting advice from people who understand business and how that might work. There is lots of financing available for different things in Canada. As an aside, if anyone in this program ever wants to chat about that, I know that pretty well, not quite inside out, but pretty well. So yeah, I think you definitely should have some of your money, but I would not advise jumping in just with your own money, or at least not having assessed what is available to you, and sometimes shifting your idea because it actually lines up better with existing financing. Canada is not great for private investment, but there's lots of federal, public, and public adjacent monies. And I mentioned to Dennis, I might come back and talk about just about that stuff at some point, because I do a lot of it.
Answer the question, Yang? Is that, yeah, I'm getting thumbs up there. That's awesome. And again, I guess you touched on this earlier too. I mean, it's better to do maybe a short than a feature if you're looking at trying to keep your costs down in the beginning anyway, as far as, because then you can raise after you've got your pilot.
Or not even a short, like 90-second sizzle concept. Like, what do you need to get the money is the thing, right? Like, you're not going to tell it all in a short, so don't.
Well,
imagine the feature and like bake it into 60 seconds and make that really well, then show that.
Or a very sexy tagline. I mean, you had, again, an image in that tagline. I was like, I knew where you're going, and I could see the Netflix interest. It was there, right? So,
I'm never going to.
If you want to ask this question, I'm going to keep reading your text on, but you can ask it on unmute. Ask your question.
Larissa.
Wait, did you say me, Larissa? Yeah. So yeah, what sort of ways do you make your decisions on what kind of media you create based on your ideas? Because you have a bunch of different ones that are coming out in the next few years. So how do you narrow it down to a specific type of medium?
So what we're working on now, which is like kind of my ultimate goal for the business, is what we call like an XR hack. So we basically have an IP and we sit down and we like 360 it through different media type, and we approach it and explore what is the narrative value from each place. So like, how would we do this as an animated short? How would we do this as an AR experience? How would this be an installation? And it's a super rad process. Like, it's really good for all of our creativity. And usually we end up with like one or two, and then it's like, okay, kind of hone it in. Or sometimes it's super obvious, right? Sometimes you're like, this is what this is. Like, you want werewolves chasing you as the game's going to have, like, AR makes sense for that. But yeah, we try more and more to like have an IP unadulterated and just like pivot around it, and jam on that for a little while before making a call.
Awesome.
And then my last question was just what aspects, because you touched on this a little bit in your thing, but like what aspects do you have built into your pipeline when making these kinds of media to communicate with First Nations elders and their leaders to ensure that the representation does their cultures justice?
Oh, like super slow, right? Like, we just don't go anywhere quickly. And that's something I've had to learn. Like, elder time is different than Sean time. And that means you don't holler at someone being like, hey, I've got this idea, I want to get pitched next week, right? Build relationships. And so like right now we're firmly working within the BC Métis community. We've got like 2 key collaborators as part of our core team who are from that community, and then relationships through them with like a half dozen knowledge keepers and Métis Nation BC. And so, yeah, we're always slow as possible, and ask, right? Like I don't encounter people that I don't already have relationships with anymore, but like, yeah, if you're doing any content that's not your content, like talk to people who are from the communities first. And, sometimes people are like, yeah, cool, do that. Otherwise, and don't take one word as everyone's word, because that's a sort of a thing of tokenizing as well. But start with reading Pathways and Protocols. It's a great piece put out by Imaginative that establishes kind of like guidelines for both Indigenous communities and settlers working with those communities. It's a super good document.
Thank you. That was packed full of advice. Everyone on the call, I know it's been a marathon for you. Some of you have class right after this. Just one more Zoom call. That's it. It's Jason. He's nice. Sean, thank you again. Always enjoy our chats. Very excited about the future collaborations, things we have ahead of us. You did an amazing job working within the time box of our 1 hour here.
No, I kind of dropped the ball there. I was supposed to.
Oh, that was me. I definitely threw you too many questions.
Oh yeah, that was your fault actually.
Let's blame me. I'm the host. I'll take it.
We got some pretty heavy duty ones at the end.
If there's any stuff in chat that people have questions, like feel free to email them over to me, and I'm happy to write some responses out.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you're cool with either like a LinkedIn connection or if an email share.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Always happy to make friends at CDM.
Nice. All right. Hey everyone. Thanks for tonight. Enjoy your evenings. Sean will
Thanks
be
so
in
much,
touch.
guys. Yeah.
Till next time.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much. Bye-bye.
See y'all.